Hi everyone, I'm Tock Custom, and on this video we're going to show you how to make your own handmade pillows at home just like this. This is the first project that we're actually making from scratch on this series so far. We're going to be using the Brother SE700. Brother is sponsoring this video, so big thanks to Brother for sending me this machine. So let's show you the supplies that you'll need to get started making your own pillows. Now here are two quick examples of pillows. So there's one with the fabric that's the same on the front and the back, and there is no fringe, so it's nice and round all the way around the whole thing. And the other example I have is a rectangular pillow, and this does have fringe, and the back is black denim, where the front has a print like this. So we're going to do something more like this, but in a square. Now the most important part of this project is having some kind of pillow form. You might be tempted to use polyfill and stuff this thing yourself, but it'll always turn out lumpy, so make sure you get some kind of pillow form. This one is a 16-inch square. They also come in rectangle and circle shapes. Once you've got your pillow form, we're going to be picking our fabric. So I'm going to use a woven cotton Wind Waker print on the front and this nice soft denim for the back. Make sure you don't use anything that stretches because it will deform over time. Then for thread, I'm just going to be using black thread for the construction and probably some of this dark green for some top stitching. Make sure you've got something to measure and cut with. And then we'll need pins and something to make a pattern with. This is called Easy Pattern Tracing Cloths. I use this to make pretty much every pattern that I have in my workshop, so I highly recommend this. So now we're going to make our pattern. I'm going to be using this tracing cloth fabric, so I cut off a big square. You can also use newspaper or recycled paper if you don't have this, but we're going to cover seam allowances and everything you'll need to know to make your own pillow. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to find somewhere about the center point of this piece of pattern fabric here. So anyway, somewhere around right here is my middle point. Now again, we're doing a 16-inch square pillow form. We're going to start by just drawing a 16-inch square on our pattern fabric. So now we have our 16-inch square box here, and that's going to be the actual size of the pillow. So now we need to start talking about seam allowances. So you don't necessarily need a seam allowance ruler. I'll show you how to use this if you're brand new to sewing. But let's say we wanted to make a pillow like this that's 16 inches with no fringe. So we've got nice rounded seams right here, and it's just a throw pillow with no extra feature. How I would make this is I would add 1/2 inch seam allowance to every edge. So let's say we needed to use our seam allowance ruler. It's just this little ruler, and you slide this little plastic thing here to tell it how big your seam allowance is. These are nice for curved pieces and things like that, so simply put, I would just match up the plastic notch that you can see right here with the edge of my line, and then I'm just going to draw a dash every few inches. And when I get to corners, I'll kind of run it off the corner like that, and then I'll turn it sideways and match up my marker there. Now, using a straight edge, I would just kind of connect those dashes and just draw a straight line with a solid marker. So that's one way to add a seam allowance. And the other much simpler way of adding a seam allowance, for straight edges at least, is just to use a clear quilter's ruler like this. And I'm lining up the line here with my 1/2 inch mark here. And I'm just going to draw a line on the outside, so I know that's exactly 1/2 inch on the outside of my box. Anyway, I'm just going to do this all the way around. So now what I've got here is a pattern with 17 inches across and up and down. And for the sake of math, if you add 1/2 inch on this side and 1/2 inch on the other side, you're adding a whole inch, so 16 inches becomes 17. Forgive me, but I just want to keep this really simple. Now again, if you want to make a pillow like this with no fringe, you would just cut this out right on the outside of that seam allowance line, and that is going to be your pattern to make a 16-inch pillow by using a square with 17 inches for the seam allowance. Now I wanted to make a pillow more like this with 1/2 inch of fringe that goes all the way around with a little bit of top stitching. So all we have to do is add another 1/2 inch of seam allowance. So very quickly, I'm just going to go around and add another 1/2 inch seam allowance. And if your plan all along was to make a pillow with fringe, you could skip that first step we did with the 1/2 inch and just add a whole inch on both sides, and then you'd end up with an 18-inch square by 18-inch right here. Now, I like to label all of my patterns, even if it's pretty obvious, but I'm going to do 16-inch pillow form with 1/2 inch fringe. All right, now using a rotary cutter, I'm just going to cut out my pattern on the outside of our biggest box here. So we're going to have a perfect 18-inch square pattern. All right, and now that we have our pattern, we can grab our fabrics and get ready to start cutting out our pillow patterns. So again, we're going to use this woven Wind Waker fabric along with some nice green denim or twill for the back. And all I need to do is lay down some fabric. And this is folded in half. I'm not going to unfold it because I might want to make 2 of them. So simply, I'm just going to lay down the pattern right on a flat piece of fabric. Anyway, all I'm going to do is just line up my ruler with the edge of the pattern and just cut across. You can also draw this out with chalk and cut it out with scissors if you don't have a cutting mat. But anyway, we're just going to cut this out of the denim, and then I'm going to lay this pattern on top of this other fabric here, and we're going to cut out another square with that. All right, so taking off the pattern, I can see that I've got a 18-inch square with the Wind Waker fabric, and I've got an 18-inch square with our green denim here. So all of our cutting is done for this project, and now we just have a few stitches to do and then stuff our pillow form in it. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that this is right side up. Now the right side of the fabric is the side you want to see. So I can see the cool diagonal grain line of this denim, and the back is kind of ugly. So we're going to put these right sides together, and the right side of this fabric is the side with the print on it. The back side is the side that does not have the print on it. So anyway, these are now right sides together, where the right sides are touching each other. So I'm going to take my pins here, and we're going to pin these 2 layers of fabric together. I usually start in the corners like this, and then I'm going to do one on the left, top, and right side. And for the bottom, we have to do something a little bit different because we have to leave an opening here so that we can get our pillow form into our pillowcase. So what I typically do is I'm going to take 2 pins and put them right next to each other on one side, and then maybe about 8 inches across, I'm going to take 2 pins and put these here. The reason I do the double pins is so I know where to start my stitch, and then we're going to sew all the way around, and then we're going to come here, and we're going to end here, and this is going to tell me where to stop. All right, now we can take away our pattern weights, and we are ready to sew this together. So we're going to take this over to the machine, and I will show you how to sew from here into each corner, doing our pivots, and then ending right here. So here we are at our Brother SE700, and I have not explained seam allowances in this series yet so far, so I wanted to do that real quick. So I'm going to take off my presser foot, and every sewing machine has a plate that looks something like this with these little notches. Now each of these dashes is a different measurement for seam allowances. So 1/4 inch is typical for like quilters, 3/8 inch is good for some types of garments. This one right here is our 1/2 inch seam allowance, which we're going to use for our pillow. And this is 5/8 of an inch, which is most garment patterns will use 5/8 of an inch. The grid here, I think, is for metric measurements, and in the back is our 1-inch measurements. Now, it's really important that the dashes of our seam allowances correspond with the needle position itself. So by default on this machine, the needle position is on the left. If you adjust it, just make your math measurements if you need to. Otherwise, we're just going to go ahead and start sewing this pillow together. Okay, so we've got our pinned pillow panel fabrics here. And I'm going to kind of slide this all the way in so that I'm looking at the double pins on the bottom left of our pillow. And I'm going to turn this sideways because we are going to sew to the edge of this fabric over here. Now, I'm going to put the needle position on the left because that's the most accurate for getting our seam allowance. And I'm going to line it up with this dash here. This is our 1/2 inch dash, one to the left of the 5/8 of an inch. So what I want to do is line up the edge of the fabric right with that dash, and then I'm going to put my presser foot down. Now, as I start sewing, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining that distance. And it looks like it's like right up against the edge of this presser foot here. So that's what I'm going to kind of follow. Anyway, we've done a few different sewing demos, so I'm going to just do a few stitches forward. Then I'm going to do a back stitch. And then I'm going to do another back stitch, and I'll show you why later. So anyway, we did a double back stitch. Now I'm just going to sew, trying to maintain that 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way, taking out our pins into this first corner. Now when I think I'm about 1/2 inch from the corner, put presser foot down, go a couple more stitches, lift it up, then I do my pivot, and there we go. That looks much more like 1/2 inch. Now I'm just going to sew all the way across. Take out my pin halfway. I'm doing my best to keep that 1/2 inch seam allowance going. Now as we get to our second corner, do our pivot, presser foot down, that looks perfect. Now we're going to sew across to our other corner. Okay, needle down, presser foot up, pivot, presser foot down, and back to sewing. All right, now we're coming up to our last corner here, so I'm going to get 1/2 inch close to the edge, do my pivot. And right here you can see here's our second set of double pins. So I am going to sew right up to them, pull them out. Now I'm going to do another double back stitch. So there's one and there's two, and that should be good, and now we can cut our thread. So now we're going to take this back to the table and show you what we do next. All right, so now we have our sewn inside out pillow form, and there's a couple of things I do before I turn this right side out. And the first thing is I clip my corners, and that is to reduce bulk, and you won't get little bunched up pleats of fabric when you turn this right side out. Now for this bottom edge, I did clip our corners, but I'm not going to trim anything off the bottom, and I'll show you why when we get there, but we're going to need that extra fabric to sew this shut after we put our pillow form in there. So anyway, if you're making a pillow like this with no fringe, and say this was a 17-inch square, you'd be pretty much done with your pillow form. So you would just turn it right side out. I mean, you would turn it right side out either way right now. But say this was a 17-inch pillowcase that you just sewed with your 1/2 inch seam allowance, you'd be ready. This would be good to go. Oh, I forgot to mention this in my last video about sewing tools, but this is called a seam turner, and it doesn't look like much, but it just helps poke right into these corners to get really crisp corners. So I'm going to go around and make sure that all my corners are nice and pointy. All right, now I've got all my corners pointed, and this is laying pretty flat even though I haven't ironed it. And you can see we still have our hole opening at the bottom here. And the fabric is going to kind of want to fold into itself, which is exactly what we want. All right, so like I was saying, if you were using the 17-inch pattern like this and you wanted to make your rounded, non-fringe pillow, you'd be ready to go and you could start stuffing this with your pillow form. The steps are going to be the same, but I'm going to do one extra step because this was our 18-inch pattern, and we're going to add 1/2 inch of fringe, and all we have to do is a little bit of top stitching. Now to add my fringe, the first thing I'm going to do is press this so that all of these seams are nice and flat, because I don't want any kind of puckering at all. In fact, I forgot I just got this new tabletop ironing board specifically so I could show you guys on camera how I would iron this. Now it's really common when you're sewing things together that you end up with a seam that looks like this, but if you kind of pull it apart, you realize that you really need to kind of roll this to get that seam to the very edge. So that's the whole point of what I'm doing right now. So I want to make sure that I'm rolling that seam all the way to the edge. I do this with like all my handmade clothes and bags and pretty much everything to make sure I get nice, clean, straight seams that don't have any kind of hidden fabric or overhang or anything like that. So anyway, I'm going to do the top and the sides, and then I'll show you how I do the bottom in a second here. All right, so here's the bottom of our pillowcase, and we can see that we sewed up to here. That was our first double top stitch, and here was our second one here. So here's our opening. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of press this first edge, and then try to kind of follow that same fold line along where the opening is, and then that should just kind of naturally blend into the other side over here. All right, now to add our fringe, all we're gonna do is just top stitch 1/2 inch from the edge while our pillowcase is empty and flat like this. Now this isn't super important because it won't be that noticeable, but I'm gonna top stitch with this green color because I feel like it's the closest match I have to this little green tunic here. So for the top stitching I do in these types of pillows, I don't start and stop where the opening is. I'm gonna start at the bottom left corner and do one whole side, the top, the other whole side, and then I'm gonna stop at the bottom right corner here. We'll top stitch the bottom last, but I will show you how to do that. So since you will see this stitching, since it's a top stitch, I'm gonna take out my blue bobbin thread and put in black bobbin thread. And then I will replace my thread up top with our nice soft green thread. So I'm just going to thread this up and then we should be good to go. I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to do our triple top stitch that I showed in one of my other videos. And we are going to modify this to be 4 millimeters long. I want a really thick top stitch, so this is a little bit more noticeable. All right, now I'm feeding in the bottom left corner. I'm gonna make sure I'm keeping that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to start this type of stitch. You can't really do a back stitch, but that's okay. So anyway, now I'm just gonna sew, and doing this triple stitch takes a little bit longer, but I'm gonna sew at 1/2 inch all the way up to the first corner. Okay, now when I'm about 1/2 inch from the edge, I'm gonna do my pivot while the needle's down. Now we're gonna do the top edge and then the right edge, and then we're gonna stop the stitch there. All right, now I'm at the bottom right corner. I'm gonna do kind of this weird static back stitch and then cut my thread. We're done with top stitching for right now. So we have our sides and top stitched, and you can't really see the stitching, which doesn't really matter because all we're looking for is the texture of this being kind of fringy when we're all done. So anyway, now we can take our pillow form out. And it's worth mentioning that some of these you can throw right in the washing machine, and some you can't. I think this one you can't, which is kind of a bummer, but keep your eye out for ones that you can so that you don't have to spot clean your pillow. The way I put this in is I tore off the tag on the top, and I've got the zipper of the pillow form on the bottom. What I want to do is kind of crush the top of the pillow in one hand so that I can feed it into this hole in the bottom, which I am certain I made this hole too small, but we will make it work. All right, now I'm just gonna kind of keep squishing it along the middle and stuffing it in there. This is probably a good time to mention, when we left our opening and we sewed it, we did a double top stitch. The reason I do that double top stitch is to keep that seam really strong for this part, because if you don't top stitch there, sometimes you can pop right through your stitches and then you end up with a big hole and you gotta fix it later. So anyway, that double top stitch helps to keep this part really strong. All right, we are almost there. So now the pillow is mostly done except for this hole right here. And I'm gonna show you a trick that I kind of taught myself after I made a bunch of pillows. The easiest way to sew this hole shut is on the machine. Obviously you can do it by hand if you want to, but I figured out that if I squish the pillow really tight towards the top, I'm gonna get all this loose fabric kind of where my wrist is right there. Now I'm gonna kind of try to pinch this onto the table like this, so all of the pillow form is in the top half. And I'm going to take some pins and I'm going to pin through all these layers of fabric with probably 3 or 4 pins here. All right, so I know this probably looks kind of strange up top here, but what I'm looking to do is keep all this fabric at the bottom nice and flat, because it's really hard to sew this on a machine when there is a pillow form in the way. But when I turn this sideways, I'm going to easily be able to get this under the presser foot of the sewing machine, and then I'm going to top stitch across just like we did around the sides and the top. So, all right, so let's jump on the sewing machine and we'll show you what that looks like. All right, hopefully you can see with this camera angle, but this is what we were trying to avoid, is all this bulk ending up under here. So I didn't pin any of this together. I'm just going to kind of flatten this with my fingers as we do our stitch. So I'm going to line this up where the top stitching stopped earlier. Now I'm kind of pulling the fabric tight because it was hard to pin. So anyway, I'm gonna start by doing my little weird triple stitch back stitch there. Then we're just gonna do a triple top stitch all the way across the bottom. Now if I see the bottom lining is kind of pulling, I'm just gonna kind of force this into shape and roll the fabric with my fingers as I need to so that everything looks nice and straight. All right, so we got all the way across the bottom. Now let's take it back to the table and see what this looks like. All right, so we just did our bottom top stitch, which should give it the fringe effect and also close this hole at the bottom. So now we can take our pins out and then hopefully fluff this pillow into shape. All right, I'm just gonna kind of bang it around a little bit. And that kind of bounced right back into shape. So that's a quick tip to get the bottom edge sewn, and I think it looks really good. So anyway, if you were looking to make a pillow with this cool kind of fringe texture with a different color on the back, or you wanted to make something that's smooth and the same pattern all the way around, those are two different ways to make some really good looking pillows at home in a really quick amount of time. All right, and we are all done with our new pillow, which is nice and squishy, and I like the fringe. So hopefully you learned something about making patterns or seam allowances, or you ended up with a pillow like this. Another big thanks to Brother for sponsoring this video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in our next video.